In this video, I want to talk about yarn weights. And you, as a beginner, you might think about that as thicknesses. You can see in these two strands that I have here over my hand, one is quite a bit thicker than the other. And they each have a different name. This is called bulky, and this is called superfine. And it used to be called fingering weight yarn, but this one is still called bulky. So, and I'll cover a little bit about new names and old names and stuff like that here in a second. And we'll go back to the yarn thicknesses and stuff and some examples of it. So this is a chart that I made up to go on my phone because I was having a hard time getting used to this new system. They had created a new system that designated a number and a new name, and so it kind of gave yarn a more standardized name. And I also listed, while I listed the new name, I also listed the old names in smaller letters underneath so I would know what I was looking at. And then I gave, a gauge range for the knit and the crochet, and I'll explain to you a little bit about how to use that. Now, if you have a project and you find out that the yarn that they call for is discontinued, or you just don't want to use that specific kind of yarn, they've given you a specific manufacturer and they've given you a specific type of yarn, and like I said, you don't want to use it or you can't find it, you can go on the internet and find that yarn, find the information about that yarn, find out either what weight that it calls for, or you can find out what gauge range it calls for. It might not give you a range, but it might give you a specific gauge, like so many stitches per inch or so many stitches per 4 inches. And then you can take this chart and look up that gauge range, 23 to 26 stitches or 21 to 24 stitches, and as long as it falls within that range, then you know that this is the kind of yarn you need to be looking for. So you can go to any store and buy pretty much any lightweight yarn that that it indicates that on the label and make that project. Now that, however, does not speak to the look of the project, but it will give you the right gauge and right yarn weight for it. I'm going to put this chart up on the blog so that you can download it. Just right click on it and do whatever you normally do with Windows or Mac, save picture as, or whatever it is. I think it's something different with a Mac. But you can put this on your phone if you have an iPhone. It might work for other kinds of phones too. I'm not sure. If it doesn't work for your phone, just print it out in a smaller size and keep it in your purse or your wallet. Now let's look at some of these different yarn weights. Now both of these are bulky weight yarn, and you can see this one on this side looks thinner than the blue one, but they're still both bulky weight. That's what they're designated as on the label. And then both of these are worsted weight. Now this one looks as thick as this one, but I think it can get away with that because when you use it, you're going to be pulling on it and it's going to kind of thin it out just a little bit. But this aqua blue here is probably looks quite a bit smaller than this one, but they're still both in the worsted weight gauge range. Now this next one is a double knitting. Double knitting is considered light now, and it's just a little bit smaller. You see, it's a little bit smaller than this one, and it looks quite a bit smaller than the red one. And then this next one that I have an example of is, both of these are sport weight yarn. This white one is just a little bit thinner, and I always get a different gauge with this white one than I do this red one. And then the next one that I have is called fingering, and again, it might look thicker, but once it's pulled out, it thins out quite a bit. So, you can see from back here all the way up to this point, they just gradually get thinner and thinner and thinner. This will have a huge effect on your project. If your if your project calls for bulky weight yarn and you come in and you make it with fingering weight yarn, it's going to be a lot smaller than it would be if you made it with the yarn that it actually called for. So keep all that in mind.